capture a topic or a thought. So let me know. But thank you all for your time today. I appreciate you joining in. I'm here today talking about one of my favorite topics, which is customer discovery. Essentially, talking to users and to customers, and we'll talk about how I see customer discovery and how you can leverage it in your day to day. And if you are using it today, would love to hear about your experiences, kind of at the end in the Q&A. So I'm Joel Polanco. I'm a segment lead in the network and edge group at Intel, and I work with customers in the embedded market or the Internet of Things market. And I'll talk a little bit about my experiences there and some of my experiences outside of there. So I've been with Intel 19 years now. Time flies. Been started off actually in manufacturing. Used to wear the spacesuit and go into fab every day, but moved over to marketing. I worked in the sales operations, and I've been in product now for the last 10 years. And product-wise, I've worked on B2B analytics, IoT products, retail hardware and software platforms. And so, as many of you know, Intel's largely in laptops and desktops, but I'm on the side of Intel that is working on chips going into many other things, anything from cars to refrigerators to IoT devices. Outside of work, I have a wife, a lovely wife, and one son who's now in second grade. I was just telling Will how time flies. And I also enjoy advising startups, particularly around customer discovery, what we'll be talking about today, and also do a little of investing. So that's a little bit about me. So let's get into the topic. So I'll talk about why customer discovery, kind of what it is, how I view it, and present to you with a mental model around discovery, along with the concept of does a good idea equal a good product? And some thoughts and some examples from my own career on that topic, along with my own customer discovery process, the outputs you would get from executing good customer discovery, along with some industry examples of how customer discovery leads to experiments that you can do. And this is all towards the idea of, building something that users want and testing that and iterating on that idea. So quick question for the audience, if you can in the chat, answer this question for me. What is the number one reason startup and incubation efforts fail? So take a few seconds to think about that, and then type that in the chat. And Will, if you could let me know, kind of some of the things coming across.
Well, the first one is exactly what I was going to say. Lack of product market fit seems to make sense. We have from Christina, they don't create products or features that users want. Benjamin says not getting feedback from potential customers early. Another on product market fit, funding, lack of adoption, and building the wrong thing. So a pretty good mix of answers and all,
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, very good mix of answers, and a lot of them leading to the kind of the number one answer. Now, there's a few reasons why startups and incubation efforts fail, but the number one reason is essentially building something that users or customers don't want. Building the wrong thing. And that is the number one reason, and that really ties back to a lot of the answers that were supplied. So lack of product market fit is directly linked to that, and essentially this is the reason why you want to execute customer discovery. And it doesn't mean that customer discovery is going to solve this problem, but it's going to lead you to a higher conviction around what you're building, it's going to lead you to a higher probability of not failing. And it's going to put you in a good position for understanding your markets and your customers so that when you do identify the thing that they really want, you'll be able to make a good decision as to whether or not you should build it, you can build it, and or this is going to be the market that you want to go after. So great responses. Thank you all. So this brings me to my next point, which is, a good idea, does it equal a good product? And I'm gonna bring in like a recent example. So I was in between products at my company and was looking for my next product, and there was this incubation activity. One engineer was working on a provisioning software. So in IoT, a big part of IoT is ensuring that devices or sensors and things that go out into the field, out in the wild, are able to provision themselves, and then call back, what we call call back home. So make sure that the device is flashed with the correct image or software, that when that device is turned on, the user or the installer has an easy user experience. That device calls back to the cloud or calls back to an on-premise server, and that there is a clear connection between the server and the device, and that that it's secure, and it's a device that's supposed to be where it's located. And so he had this great concept, and he approached me, and he gave the presentation about how this device would work and how the software would work. And then he basically ended the presentation with, and that's what we built, and that's what you're gonna go market. And so I quickly identified from his presentation there was one key problem. And if you look at the image, you could probably guess what that is he actually hadn't spoken to any customers yet. And so, that's a big problem. We're making a lot of assumptions around, a concept or a solution, without actually having spoken to anyone. And this was a problem that he was particularly having, and sometimes the problems that we have, other people have. But we all need to realize, like, sometimes our problems aren't scalable, or our problems are unique, or the problem that the market that you're going after is really interested in solving may not be the one that your concept solves. And so rather than getting your head into a solution space, you want to dial that back a little bit and think of it as a concept. And I like to use the word concept because until you can have that product market fit, you really do have a concept. You don't have a solution yet. And so this is my mental model for discovery. And this is based off of the famous double diamond, that you've probably seen this, but if you haven't, essentially this is the convergence and divergence of ideas between the left side, which is the problem, or the problem discovery, and so where you're identifying problems or opportunities, and then on the right side is your solution discovery, which is you're iterating on your concepts and you're testing and validating those. And sometimes you might actually start on the right side. You have a solution, just like this last example that I gave. The engineer had a very elegant provisioning idea and solution. But it hadn't been tested on the problem side yet, right? And so customer discovery is right at that convergence of the two. And essentially what customer discovery is in my mental model is validating the problem, and ensuring that there's a market for it. And so ideally, before you actually go out and build anything or spend a lot of money to go build something, you have a better understanding of whether or not this idea is really a problem, or there's going to be a market for it. And so this is what I'm going to focus on today, is this convergence of problem and solution. So I will walk you through my process now, which has a few steps. And this is the process that I like to follow because some of these tools are fairly timeless. There's different flavors of them, but what they have in is all the key elements that you want to go and make sure that you have done the due diligence on with your teams in order to validate your problem or your idea, and making sure that essentially you're working towards building something with high conviction that customers are really going to want. And so I won't go through the business model canvas in detail, but I will talk about a few key elements that are really important here. So when I'm focusing on uh, talking through this or walking people through this, we start off by focusing on the right side. And the right side is really key. You're going to put, maybe 80% of your effort in your business model into your customer segments, your value propositions, and then the relationships, your customer relationships. That right side of the canvas is really critical, particularly around your value proposition and customer segments. And a couple of the things, to remember here is one, customer segments are people. So you might start off with a customer segment at a very high level, like, SMB, SMB, Internet of Things, software vendors, or, large enterprise, human resource SaaS companies, depending on what your product or service is focused on. But what you quickly want to do is identify those segments and then drill that down. You want to remember customer segments need to result in people. And the reason that is because, especially in B2B, by the way, these segments are people that you're going to need to go talk to. They have roles. When customers purchase your product, they are typically purchasing on committees. And so if you're at such a high level, you're not going to actually get the level of granularity and detail that you need to identify the actual people who are going to be the purchasers of your product. And sometimes the purchasers and the users might not be the same people. So you also want to distinguish within your customer segment, who are the companies and who are the purchasers. Maybe it's the purchasing department, it's the purchasing manager, it could be the VP of purchasing or sourcing. The user, who is the user? Is the user someone within the IT department? Is it, are they at a customer service desk, or are they in part of a line of business? Are they, oil field operations managers? You want to get down to that level of granularity, specific roles and personas for those roles. That way, when we go to the next steps, you actually have specific people that you can go interview and test your value propositions against. So in the case of value propositions, these are the specific sources of value that you're delivering to your customer segments, or the people, the roles and responsibilities, the folks that you're solving these problems for. How are you delivering value? And value should be in the form of value equals benefits minus costs. And so, what is it going to cost someone to adopt your product or your solution? And what benefits are they get? And you want to make sure that equation is always leaning towards more benefits, obviously, because you might be trying to displace an incumbent. You may in fact have to create a new business process to leverage your product. Maybe the company doesn't have a business process in place to be able to use your product, and you actually have to work with them to create that process. There just as out there in the wild, in the real world, that prevents the adoption of your product. And customer discovery and going through the business model canvas, you try to think through those things ahead of time before you build anything. And so the last piece here is this is a living document. You want to continue to iterate and evolve it. Each week as you go through and interview more people, you want to copy, paste, create a new one, or not create necessarily a brand new one, but copy the one that you had last week and make tweaks to it and continue to iterate over time. And so the next piece is in your business model canvas, you want to think of yourself as a business scientist. And everything that goes into that business model canvas at this point are hypotheses. Because a scientist, doesn't want to make assumptions, like that engineer that I mentioned on a couple slides ago, made some big assumptions, like this is the solution. Now we can start marketing and selling it. And a scientist would say, well, you haven't made any sales yet, so why would you start marketing? You have a hypothesis about what your concept can do and whose problems it solves, but you actually don't have any evidence. And so you want to create hypotheses that you can go out and test, and you want to capture all these ideas on your business model canvas as ideas, as hypotheses. They're not the truth yet. You're trying to validate them and make sure that they are the truth, and you're trying to gather evidence along the way to be able to do that. And the most important point here is to make sure your hypotheses are specific and measurable, and you want to be able to invalidate them. And so some of you might be saying, well, hey, wait a second. Are you saying we want to invalidate? I thought you want to validate. And it's actually the other. I recommend to approach it from the other way around. You want to invalidate. What you want to be scratching out the things that you had wrong. And you want to get those removed and move to the next iteration of your business model canvas, because a lot of things that you're working through at this point are just not going to work. They're not the truth. You're making a lot of assumptions coming in, and they're just gonna by inherently be wrong in a lot of cases. Some are gonna be right, and you want to have strong evidence that shows that those things are right and are validated. But at this point in the game, if you're early on in a discovery process, you want to be super efficient with your time, because that's your most critical resource. And so what you want to do is quickly invalidate things and remove them, so you're not spending time on things that are not going to go anywhere. You don't want to build something that someone's not going to use. And so you want to land on those critical mass of things that a small customer, one of your customer segments, a small one ideally, is really gravitating towards, and you're getting that strong conviction around a product market fit for. And so a couple of the mistakes on the business model canvas would be having too many customer segments to start, having too many roles and responsibilities, too many people to go interview. You want to keep that fairly narrow. You want to measure that, and you want to scratch them out quickly so you can move on to the next one. So now that you have your business model canvas and your hypotheses, and you're beginning to think about invalidating those hypotheses, how are you going to do that? You're going to need to do that by tying interview questions, to the hypotheses and to the interviewees, your customer segments, or those roles or those personas that you're going to be interviewing under each of those customer segments. And so your interview questions need to be fairly simple. You may need multiple questions for each hypothesis that you have documented on your business model canvas. And as a result of that, the number one thing that I recommend here is to really shy away from hypothetical or futuristic questions. Focus on real evidence. And so what that would mean in practice would be coming up with questions on how people are solving their problem today. So, for instance, if your product could make a current process more efficient. Say your customer has a process and it's fairly lengthy, and you've developed a new solution to be able to make that process more efficient. Your hypothesis would be, I'm making this process more efficient. You're going to want to ask questions around, how are you solving this problem today, or what process are you going through to solve this problem today, or what are the slow parts of the process today, or what tools do you use today to execute this process. Things that are focused in the now, that are you have actual real evidence for, is where you're going to want to focus. I would shy away from, well, what do you think if you were to do X, Y, or Z? Those are very hypothetical. Those are very futuristic. It puts a person in a mind state of, I could potentially see myself doing X, Y, Z. Those don't have as much actual real evidence that they're going to work, and so they could end up leading you in the wrong direction. And so I, again, focus these questions on being specific, measurable, and in a set up in a way where they can tackle your hypotheses. They can invalidate them based on real evidence in what's going on in today. Okay, the next part I'm going to tell you, this part is tough. This part is tough. This is depending on your product. Now, if you're in B2C space, you may be able to get lots of interviews, depending on what your product is. If you're in B2B, I'm going to tell you, this typically can be very tricky. And a lot of times, the reason folks don't want to do discovery, or they, not necessarily that they don't want to do customer discovery, but they shy away from it, is it begins to start to feel like sales, because you're having to reach out to different folks in your network, or to different people that you typically aren't talking to, in order to get your interview questions answered, right? Because now you may be looking, you may be in one industry, but your product or solution solves a problem in another one. And so you're having to build that network, and that doesn't come natural to everyone. So we have product managers, or a wide range of people. Some are very extroverted, some are very introverted. And a lot of times, doing sales isn't so comfortable, and this feels like sales, even though it's not. And so you need to be prepared to get rejected, to get stood up, to get ghosted, to running into scheduling and calendar issues. And so just, you want to be mindful of that ahead of time, but don't give up. I'm here to tell you that this, following best practices, leveraging your network, building a process to source your interviews, talking to other product managers who do customer discovery. You can reach out to me for other best practices, and get a process that works for you. My recommendation is to be authentic. Don't sell. Make sure you let them know you're researching first off, and that you have nothing to sell yet. Because the reality is if you're doing customer discovery and you're talking to your users before you build something, you don't have anything to sell yet. And so make sure that is well known. And what you'll find a lot of times is actually people will help you, especially if you're honing in on a problem that they have. And if you're identifying your problems their problems really well, and you're talking about that, you'll find that actually people really like to talk about their problems. And they like to talk about their problems, and they're willing to talk to you even if they don't know you, because they believe there's a chance, or they can see that someone is actually trying to help them. And so I can tell you from personal experience, people will work with you. They'll find the time to talk to you, but you do need to be a little persistent. You can't give up. And so that's the value you can offer in return. Another piece of value you can offer in return is, when you're doing this research, is a lot of times especially in B2B, if you're researching a particular problem, these companies are always doing market research. And so if you're researching a key topic or problem that a segment or an industry has, and you compile this research and you anonymize it, like you don't say what companies you spoke to or what specific people, but you kind of aggregate it, you can come back and let them know, hey, I'll interview you. Thank you for your interview. I'd love to, if you can give me some time back again, I'm happy to come back and share my results with you. And that often offers a lot of value in return because it helps them actually collect data about something going on in their industry. That's one technique that I've used in the past. So again, leverage your network, and then build a process that works for you, and try to get over that uncomfortable feeling. I think I saw a hand raised, Will, if there was a question.
Yeah, I don't see the question in the chat yet, but I'm keeping my eyes peeled here.
Sounds good. If you have a question, throw it over to Will and he'll stop me. Okay, I'll move on to analysis. So now that you've built your business model canvas, you've built your hypotheses, you've created questions that align to your hypotheses, and they're going to help you validate or invalidate your hypotheses. Now you've gone out and interviewed folks, you've asked them these questions. Now you want to consolidate all that information and begin to analyze the results. And so for me, I kind of come from an analytical background, engineer, love analyzing data. It's amazing when you have data. It really sucks when you don't, a lot of times. And so at this point, you have some information. It's primary research that you've done. Now you want to collect your data. And if you're on a team, this scales really well because you can all go out and interview and ask the same questions to different people and build up your sample size pretty quickly. If you're doing it by yourself, it takes a little bit longer, but essentially at this phase, you're consolidating all your information, and then you're looking at the responses to all the questions that you got, and you're starting to build some conviction here around certain things, your customer segments and the value propositions and how they resonate. And this is where you can start really invalidating your hypotheses. And, the other part of this is not just about hypothesis invalidation, but it's about the other key insights that come out, because you're going to get a lot of them. There are techniques that I use around divergent and convergent questioning, where you might dial in and focus on a hypothesis to be able to invalidate it, but then the interviewee might start talking about more and more about the topic, and you want to let them continue to talk after they've been speaking about their problem, because they'll give you more insights about that problem, real big nuggets about the issues they're having, or the timelines, or the speed at which the current solutions work. It could be a number of things, or it could be a complete pivot away from the problem that you thought was the problem. And so that's where you pull out these key takeaways. So you're invalidating those key hypotheses, but you're also being open to making sure that you're capturing other insights. And so then this allows you to go back and iterate. Basically, you go back to your business model canvas as you've done enough of these interviews and analyses, and begin to update your business model canvas. And hopefully you're moving towards a stronger and stronger business model as you go through this process, and you're getting more and more conviction about what you should go build. And so again, this is where the magic starts to show up out of this, is because you kind of started with basically like some data. You might have some secondary market research, but now that you've been executing customer discovery, now you're beginning to get some information where you had none in the first place. and it allows you to have a much better, stronger understanding of your market, your customer segments, the the roles of those customer segments, the people that work within them, their responsibilities, the jobs to be done that they have, their processes, and how your products value propositions tie back and help them solve their problems. Because really, that's what this is all about. When you're in a startup or in an incubation, you need to remember you don't have a business yet, right? You're searching for a business, and really what you're searching for are problems and how you can go solve those problems, because that is what customers are going to go pay for. Okay, I'll pause there, Will.
Cool. So just a quick message from LogRocket, the sponsor of today's webinar. We are an AI-first session replay and product analytics company, and our newest product, Galileo AI, is actually the outcome of a rather lengthy customer discovery process, something that we've been hearing in the field for a few years at this point, is that product teams are overwhelmed by the amounts of data that they have about how users experience their products. With session replay, you might be capturing millions of replays per month. Obviously, nobody has time to watch those all. And just the raw amount of analytics data you're capturing can be overwhelming as well. So what we've built is Galileo AI. It's designed to be essentially a 24/7 product analyst that watches all of your session replay data automatically and identifies the most impactful user experience issues that are impacting users and hurting your most critical product KPIs. And so I'll leave it at that. If anyone's interested in learning more, we will include a link to follow up in the email with the recording after the webinar. And yeah, with that, I'll pass it back over to Joel for some examples.
Okay, thanks, Will. Okay, so the next part of my presentation, we'll talk about kind of what next. So, you've at this point, you've built your business model canvas, your initial hypotheses, the questions to go validate them or invalidate those hypotheses. You've done analysis. You may have iterated a few times. You're getting more and more conviction about what you should go build. And so now you want to go and experiment. So there's a lot of these examples that are out there. So I'll present 3 of them today. You probably heard of at least one of these. And these are essentially the next step. In some cases, they can result in sales and sometimes not. But again, you're being very intentional about what it is you're trying to build. So this first example is from Sony. So this is an older one, but it's one I really love because it helps you distinguish between your interviews and the questions, the what's called the attitudinal data versus your actual actions that a customer or a user might take, which is called your behavioral data. And so in the case of the yellow Walkman, so Sony had built this Walkman, and they were trying to understand how many variations of it they should build. And so they had this idea of building the yellow Walkman. And so of course, they had a black one and then a yellow one, and they conducted a survey and they asked these potential buyers, they brought them in, they asked them some questions about the product, and one of them was, are you interested in buying a yellow Walkman, or would you buy a yellow Walkman? And based on the survey results, actually interest in a yellow Walkman was pretty high. And so um, the next part was, after the survey was conducted, all the participants were able to take home a Walkman. And so Sony had, their market research team had put a table out at the door at the exit, and you could actually select either a black or a yellow Walkman on your way out the door. And which one do you think the participants took home? Put it in the chat. Any guesses on which one they took home, the black or the yellow.
We have a couple guesses for each, actually, Joel. It's kind of divided here.
Got it. So yeah, it's divided, largely went towards the black. And so even though the interest was really high, people stated, it was fairly high towards yellow. By and large, most people took home a black one. So this just goes to tell you what people say and what people do aren't always the same thing. And the point here is you want to lean towards what do people do? what you want to look at that behavioral data. And so as you conduct this customer discovery process and you're going through interviews and asking questions, let's go back to kind of what I had said earlier is it's not what would you do, right? You don't want to lean away from that futuristic kind of question as to versus what do you have actual evidence of what they've done. So think about that, when you're forming your questions and or taking the next step of actually running experiments. Think about what behaviors do you actually have real empirical evidence for. Okay, next experiment. This one is probably the most famous one. Most of you may have heard of this, but it's Dropbox. Essentially, Dropbox, before it was a company. They were part of Y Combinator, and a big part of Y Combinator, is around customer discovery. Going through the cohorts and trying to identify things that customers will buy or use. And so they had this concept of file sharing. File sharing isn't a big problem today because a number of companies like Dropbox and Box and other and Google and others have solved this. But this actually used to be a really big problem. And so the main solution back in the day was either using FTP or sending emails. So developers at Dropbox, early founders had this idea of how it could be easy to deliver files through the cloud. And so they created this demo video, and then they published an article on Hacker News, and they were able to drive 5,000 interested prospects like really fast. And they were able to do this because they had an early customer profile. They had a really good idea of who their customer segment was. They're putting this out on Hacker News, which is targeted towards developers. And they had a really good idea around what the problem was. And that's what the video was actually centered around, was more of the problem, less around the solution. And so you can actually find this video. It's still on YouTube. The demo video, if you search for it, it's really interesting. But this is a great example of running an experiment before coding up or building out a solution. Okay, and in my last example here, I read about this one recently in the book Clear Thinking by Shane Parrish. If you haven't read that book, highly recommend it. It's just got a number of great ideas on how to think clearer, ideas and mental models and concepts on how you can position yourself for being able to perform better. And that's whether it's personally or in business. But basically the concepts around how do you position yourself for success. And he talked about his friends were formed Tuft and Needle. And so Tuft and Needle, they had this idea. They at the time, shipping mattresses to someone's house was not a thing. And they had a fairly bad experience with purchasing a mattress. They looked kind of at the industry and they're like, hey, like they felt like this is actually not a very good buying experience. And so they had this concept where they knew that these foam mattresses existed. They believed that they could actually create a product that could get shipped directly to someone's house. And so they created a sign up page. They created a landing page, and then they went out and they purchased paid media, so search terms, and then they turn on Google Ads, and within 15 minutes they started booking early sales through their sign up page. And they did not have a product, they did not have a company, but this gave them the validation, right, that there was this problem and that their solution could potentially be solve that problem. Now they had to go off and build that product and build that, you know, their whole supply chain, but you know, they didn't go off and spend and invest all this money up front to build that. You know, they did it the other way around. And this gets to the idea of this is actually in many cases the easier way to go and do it. Rather than going off and building a solution first, you can actually go and validate the problem. That's what customer discovery is all about, is getting out there and getting to a point where you can run these experiments. And they can be very small or they could be very big. In this case, you know, they had a sign up page, they drove traffic, and they didn't have a product, so they actually they started taking people's money, but then they returned all the money, and then they came back and let them know that, hey, we are going to you know, we are going to build this business, and if you are interested in this product, we'd love to have you as an initial customer. So great example, really creative idea, and just an excellent way to go and position yourselves in the right place at the right time, and most importantly with the right early customer profile, aligned to your segments and or your value propositions.
And Joel, we got a question in the chat. Could you repeat who is the author of Clear Thinking?
Oh yeah, that's Clear Thinking by Shane Parrish.
Cool. Thank
Yeah,
you.
and he actually has a podcast. Shane Parrish, it's the Knowledge Project. There's a website and a podcast, great podcast. He brings on experts in different industries. It's been really insightful for me on a number of topics, and just a really seems like a really good guy. But the book was amazing, so highly recommended. Okay, so now you've gone through, you know, we've again going back, we've done the business model canvas, you've done your hypotheses, you've done your questions, you've invalidated your hypotheses through analyses, you may have iterated, may have even executed an experiment if you're lucky enough to get to that point. And so, you know, some of the outputs that you're going to get out of all of this, why are you doing this? You know, you need to get something out. You should be able to validate your customer segments or invalidate them, and the value propositions, you know, the value propositions that you're going to deliver, that your benefits are going to exceed the costs. You're going to have customer personas, something you're going to need for later anyways. Like this is all, you're just accumulating a ton of collateral at this point. You're going to have early customer profiles. Hopefully you've nailed down a segment that you would go tackle early on. And then you want to be able to then translate that early customer segment into market sizing. So the reality is you know, you're going to want to start with a small customer segment to start, but you want to be going after a bigger market, you know. So we talk about TAM, your total available market, the SAM, which is the share of that total market that you believe you can serve. And then if there's competition or alternatives in that SAM or that share that you can serve, what would be your estimated market segment share? What percentage of the market do you believe that you can go after? And this is all information that especially, you know, if you're a startup, you're going to need to have for your venture capitalists. They're going to be asking for all of this information. Have you done interviews? Have you spoken to customers? Do you have a TAM, SAM, MSS? What is your projections? Who's your early customer profile? They're going to ask all these things. Your ecosystem map. So how do your customers work through channels, or where do they buy from, and where do those people buy from, or how does the product get to the customer? So you can have this map built out, and then hopefully, if you're lucky, you have some potential early sales. But at a minimum, you'll have done some sort of demand testing and have run some, if you're lucky enough, some experiments. And so again, this is all expectations, whether you're at a large company and on an incubation effort, or whether you're at a early stage or seed startup and you're trying to get that initial funding. These are all expectations of you. And so, and in fact, a lot of times, in many industries, this is actually even more important than the solution itself, because the number one thing that these investors are looking for is de-risking. And so a big part of that risk is the market risk or the customer risk. Do you have actual customers that want this? So this will all be helpful for you in making your case for getting funding, whether it's incubation or startup. Cool. So in summary, if I hope you leave today feeling like, talking to customers is imperative. I want to be the champion that says that you go back and remember this presentation. I need to go talk to my customers. It's not gross. It doesn't have to feel like sales. You can be delivering value. You can be helping people. You can take a different mindset, but talking to them is imperative. And doing that with a business scientist approach. Don't try to be humble. Make sure that you're not making assumptions. Or try to minimize those assumptions and then minimize your bias. We all fall in love with our solutions, but you really want to fall in love with the problem and making sure that you're helping someone and that you're working on a problem that's actually really important and reaching a lot of people, because at the end of the day, you're trying to build a business, you're trying to build a profitable product. And as a product manager, you need to make sure it's viable. That viability is super important, because you won't be able to sustain a business if you're not working on something that's important, or there isn't a large enough market for. And then again, make sure you validate your ideas through real evidence, not through futuristic hypotheticals. Futuristic hypotheticals are fun for brainstorming. You can come up with some great ideas that way. But again, to validate those ideas, you want to have some sort of real evidence that backs up your assertions or your assumptions. So with that, I will conclude and turn it over back to Will for Q&A. If you have any questions, please throw them in the chat.
Cool. Yeah, I guess while we wait for questions to come in, I have one myself, Joel. How do
Yeah.
you have any tips for avoiding bias during the interview process? I think you may have alluded to a couple, but curious what you have to say there.
Yeah, I think a couple of key things is your one is, and I made this mistake, avoid going towards the solution. Do not, if you may have a concept or a solution already, you want to avoid that initially, because what happens is if you start to talk about your solution first before you talk about the problem, then everyone gets tunnel visioned on that solution, and it's just inherent for human psychology. As soon as you focus on an initial topic, that's the starting point of the whole conversation, and then it's hard to back up out of it. And so a ton of bias will get introduced early on in any interview if you bring up solutions first. So stay away from that. So one thing you can do is, let them know, hey, like, I understand you're an XYZ at company ABC. I'm trying to get a sense of what are your critical, what's critical to your role, and what's on your top, I call it like your top 5 list. It's a divergent question that just says, hey, what are some of your key responsibilities or challenges you have in your company or your role. And that helps you understand what their priority list is. And then it also gives you a data point as to, is the problem that I'm working on even on that list? So you can always start with that. Um, the best indicator if you're working on the right problem, but it at least is an indicator and it keeps you away from biasing towards your solution.
Cool, thank you. And then a question from Mohammed, kind of a follow-up on that. He says B2B customers usually like to talk in terms of solutions, perhaps the solutions they currently use. So how do you tackle that by bringing it back to the problem?
Yeah, I think that's great. Like that's actually really helpful for getting something I didn't show in the outputs, but your ecosystem map will have competitors that you would put your competitors or alternative ways of solving the problem. And so, for instance, one of the problems we were working on was in IoT, and we were talking about sanitary conditions, and we discovered, the solution the customer was talking about was largely based on recording on pen and paper. And so as it turned out, the solution wasn't really like what we would think in tech as a real solution because it's like still on pen and paper. And so um, what kind of it diverged away from the sanitary conditions into another problem, which was actually they didn't have a scalable way to like track how often cleanliness was being executed. It was like basically the honor system, and that led us to some other questions and parts of the ecosystem that we had to interview. And so basically, this is a long-winded way of saying be sure you're actively listening and trying to read between the lines while people are talking about these other solutions that they're using, because they may be giving you other nuggets about the problem itself in terms of the alternative ways that they're solving the problem.
Well, and then a question from Hannah. She says, I often have quick turnaround times to produce deliverables. How can I be intentional about gathering valuable customer intel without being able to hold multiple interviews?
Mm. Yes, it sounds like, yeah, you're under pressure to produce results, and you may be concerned about the sample size. You may be concerned about moving too quickly towards a solution without having data. And I'll be completely honest with you here. This is a part where I struggle a bit because I'm always wanting more data. And where we work, there are timelines, and frustration levels can go up high, so you cannot get into analysis paralysis. So couple of recommendations here, things that have worked for me is as you go through your interviews and you begin to collect more info, try to keep some sort of indicator to communicate back to your management or to your teams around your percent confidence in the conviction of your understanding of the problem and your team's ability to solve that problem, or AKA your product confidence, your product market fit confidence. And you will know over time as you interview more people whether or not you're moving in the right direction. And so you want to keep them up to speed in some measurable way, in some way communicate back to them that you feel confident or you don't feel confident. So at least there, at minimum, there's an awareness that, hey, I know we need to build, I know we need to, we have a budget, we have a timeline. But I also want to communicate that confidence is either low or high, and that can help you spur other conversations towards potentially getting more people to help you with your interviews. Because if you can execute more questions and more interviews with your team, and not just by yourself, you can gather more resources, you can get more input coming in, and you get more people bought in to taking this approach versus, hey, we're going to build the solution approach. Because what could happen here is you end up building the wrong thing and you go out of business. You don't have a product, or your incubation effort gets defunded. later, right? And that's the worst case, right? The last thing you want to do is build something that people don't want. But this is a tough problem to solve in the industry. I won't deny that.
Yeah, and one quick thing to add there, I think, is especially if you're talking about collecting feedback for existing products, one thing you could consider is more passive methods of collecting feedback, using something like LogRocket for in-app feedback surveys and session replay to get a view into what struggles and problems users might be having with your software. But that's a bit more of a pointed solution there.
A great point. A great point.
Cool. I think that will do it for all the questions then. So yeah, thanks so much to everyone for showing up and joining us today. I had a great time. And thanks, Joel. I learned a few things today. I think it was a great presentation.
Thank you, Will, and thank you everyone for your time. I really appreciate you coming in. And if you have any questions or you'd love to talk about customer discovery, please reach out. You can find me on LinkedIn or here at my website, joel@heyjoel.com.
All right. Well, thanks, Joel. Thanks, everyone, and hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.